Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. It is July 6, 2020. Hope you had a safe and happy holiday. Uh, Tonight's broadcast is on sex, gender orientation, and coming out. I've been asked more than once to do a broadcast on this topic, and this is one of those topics I feel quite humbled by because I don't know if I am adequately qualified to speak on this topic. But I'm told by the people who requested that I can't wait to become qualified. And since I'm the person who does these, it falls upon me to do it. So I just want to say, and I'm going to say this more than once this evening, I've made virtually every mistake that there is to make. Maybe not some of the gross ones where there's been obvious judgment and resistance and defensiveness to issues of gender and orientation, but I've made all the subtle ones. And I've had to field more than one phone call or email from clients early in my career who needed to tell me about that and whom I needed to listen to. So, as you might be working through this in your own life with somebody that you care about, I just want to offer that idea that you're not alone when or as you struggle with these issues. So I'm going to share some of these with you. I consulted with an expert that I'm close to, and that's my transgender son, and asked him what are some key concepts that he thinks that LGBTQ plus children want their parents to know about, and he shared some of those ideas with me. He also shared some of the mistakes that he finds common. A lot of his social group are LGBTQ youth, both in our local culture here, our local community, and also in his school. And even for myself, dealing with a son who's transgender has been a process for me. It was a process for him, and it was a process for us. Initially, he came out to us as bisexual, and my initial first comment, my first comments weren't the ideal. I kind of stumbled through them. Um, and as he came out first as bisexual and then as non-binary and now identifying as transgender, it was kind of a gradual progression for him, but it was also a gradual progression for me and his mother. And even some of you that I recognize on this list, um, I know were ahead of me in the process and probably had to put up with me during the process. So that's just some context to give you some awareness about my own process and my own really lack of qualification to do this. I want to talk about some common positions that people might take, that parents have taken in the past. Um, you might have the position that it's wrong, that 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 it's a sin or that it's a mental illness to identify as a gender that's not the gender that one was assigned to at birth, or that to to identify as anything other than heterosexual. That could be your position. That might come from the culture that we live in. It could come from your church. It come from your own family traditions and values. It could come from any of those places. Um, it could come from the position, of course, that you know more than they do. I think a lot of parents think that their role in all of this is to be the expert in life when it comes to their children, to have all of the answers. I think that's one of the most insidious ideas that we can have as parents, is that we have to know everything. That sets us up, of course, for failure, and doesn't model for our children that you don't maybe ever know everything that there is to know. A lot of folks will say, especially to children in their teens, you don't really know yourself yet. I remember one of my very favorite stories about coming out is when a young adult daughter identified as transgender, um, and was sharing with their parents and talking about the judgment that she felt from them that came largely from their religious context. And she was in our program and she was really struggling with her relationship with her parents. And during one of the parent phone calls, the parents asked her in kind of a subtle challenge to her narrative that they hadn't accepted her. They said, "We didn't judge you when you first came out. What did we say?" And they were asking her to restate it back. And they said, well, you said to me that it was okay either way, but that I didn't fully know myself yet. And the parents said, see, that was evidence to them that they had shown enough acceptance of her. And she said, but if I had come out as cisgender, in other words, the gender that I was assigned at birth, and heterosexual, you wouldn't have said to me. Nobody that comes out as heterosexual, in fact, you don't really come out as heterosexual, but nobody who identifies as heterosexual in their teen years has a parent say to them in response to that, well, you don't really know yourself yet, right? If you have a son that has his first girlfriend, you don't say, well, now you're heterosexual, but who knows? You might be gay. You might be bisexual later. You don't really know yourself yet. And I thought it was a really powerful, clever, and intelligent way to challenge her parents and their delusion that they were accepting as they thought they were. So that comment about, you don't know who you are yet is a subtle but really powerfully dismissing way to talk about the child's identity or orientation. Again, because this is for many people a moral issue. The idea that many parents have is that it's your job to teach and reinforce morality with your children. You might simply be uncomfortable and afraid in dealing with these issues, not knowing really how to do it or what it's going to mean, what are going to be the implications for your child going forward. You might be worried about how people will treat them. I remember one family that was really struggling with this transition for them into accepting their teenage son as gay. And they said, we wish we could just move away from all of our family to somewhere else so that our son didn't have to deal with the judgment that we know that he's going to face in our community and in our extended family. And while that might seem supportive, that fear can come across and is often interpreted as the child is as unaccepting. You worry that your life will be harder. That's one that I used to use and say and justify my discomfort early in my career with children is talk about how their life would be harder. But we don't really think about that when it comes to somebody's authentic self in ways that we accept and endorse. In fact, we say just the opposite. We tell children when their values line up with us and their authentic self lines up with what we think and feel about life, we say to them, it's worth it. Even though you might not be accepted, even though you might be judged, being who you are is worth it. And so this response also is another way of dismissing the child. And there's a loss of dreams of life as you expect it to be that's involved in this. And so as I talk about your reactions and supporting your children going forward, we'll talk about several of those. I want to first of all talk about, this is probably the jumping off point, but yet the most important point that I can make tonight. I want to talk about our reference point at Evoke. When I was concluding a parent meeting many years ago, somebody came up to me, and I can't remember their religious background. It might have been a priest or a pastor or a rabbi, I'm not sure. But they came up to me afterwards and they said they're hearing something different in their religious context, something different than what I was teaching. And they were asking me to kind of reconcile the two and what do I do with that? And this was a really troubling idea for me. It wasn't a new one. And so I brought this to my supervisor at the time and I said, I'm confused about how to answer this. I don't know how to talk to parents in such a way to support them in their religious convictions and at the same time provide a safe space for the child in the system. And my supervisor said, you have the luxury, Brad, of being a therapist, a psychotherapist. That's your job. You're not a priest, a pastor, a bishop, a rabbi, a cleric, but you're a psychologist, you're a psychotherapist, and that's your job. So The reference point you have is much more pragmatic, much more from a scientific context and a matter of fact. And so our reference point is we're going to support you as best we can, but we're going to give you the data so that you can make the decision. And most importantly, without me trying to argue against any of your value system, any of your belief system, any of your background, is just to say that how you, and this is going to be the emphatic point that I'll make this evening, how you respond to your child. The amount of acceptance that you show to them will and does have dramatic impact on their mental health, their mental state. And it has a dramatic impact on their mood, their depression, and even their self-harm and suicidality. And I'll talk more about that as I move along. The effects of supportive, moderately supporting, and highly rejecting parental attitudes. I'll share some of the data a little bit later, but just last year, I was at a presentation at a professional conference, and somebody was presenting these three categories: accepting, moderately accepting, rejecting, and then highly rejecting. And they were talking about the data in terms of suicide. And they were talking about how highly rejecting families, highly rejecting parents, the children are 9 times more likely to attempt suicide or seriously consider suicide. And in moderately accepting, rejecting families, children are only twice as likely to attempt or seriously consider suicide. And the person giving the presentation, who specialized in this area, was kind of satisfied with this as a target. Getting parents to this place where they were only moderately rejecting their child's identity, their child's identification. And I had that thought, I thought, isn't that remarkable? That if you are moderately accepting, rejecting, your child is only twice as likely to attempt or seriously consider suicide. And that would be a goal, an ideal to strive for. It was profound to me and didn't sit well with me as a psychotherapist. Like I said earlier, I've made most of the mistakes that I'm going to talk about tonight. I've learned that it's my job to celebrate my clients' authentic self, who they are, and even their journey. I'll talk a little bit later about the idea of holding them lightly and going along with them and their process and their journey. Like I said, it is a process. Coming out can be a process. It can happen in stages, incrementally, and it's also a process as a parent. It doesn't, for everybody, happen overnight that you are highly supportive of your child's identification, their orientation. It can take some time, but that's okay, and you can go do work, and you can get support, and you can talk to other people. It's important, I think, that you're kind to yourself, even if the other isn't, that you take care of yourself, but understand that your child or your significant, whoever it is in your life, might not want to express or take care of your emotional state. One of the things that my son said to me this evening in preparation for this is, he said, one of the biggest things that is harmful to LGBTQ youth is that they are asked to take care of their parents' guilt. When their parents misgender them or make a mistake or make a statement that's harmful, the parent will often kind of regress into a shameful place, and they implicitly ask the child to take care of them. So my son asked me to encourage all of you to not do that with your children. So, but you can be kind to yourself, and you can find other people. You can find people in your community. If you have a pride center in your community, you can go where other parents are meeting to learn how to best support their children. And really, it gets down to, what is your job? I mean, I think this is at the heart of it. I think a lot of parents believe that the job of a parent, like I said, is to know the truth. Not just the truth, but your child's truth, and then present that to them. And so this is going to really create a challenge for many people at the core of their value system about what it means to be a parent. I did a broadcast 2 or 3 months ago about what does it mean to be a good parent, challenging the notions about what it means to be a good parent. And then there's this big shift from getting it right and being perfect to just being a safe container and being a human, being a fallible human, being able to apologize, being able to be a work in progress, letting go of being that perfect parent. I talk about this idea of holding them lightly. You know, what I've learned for myself, especially because my child, like I said, their coming out story was incremental, was staged by step in stages. I've had to learn to kind of hold them lightly. I this might seem trite to you, but the greatest equivalent that I can compare it to explain this concept of holding them lightly is I had to deconstruct my ideas about gender and sexual orientation. Sexual identity, and I haven't defined this yet, is how you see yourself. Male, female, or non-binary, or somewhere in between. What is your gender? It's not two genders, it's many genders. And I know this is a relatively new concept for a lot of folks, but still, even the language of both genders or either gender, that kind of language still excludes a lot of people. I remember when I was talking to a colleague of mine many years ago when he was dealing with, and really, I guess by extension, I was dealing with my first non-binary individual. That's somebody who doesn't identify as male or female, but somewhere in between. He said to me that his client asked to be referred to as they and them, which, by the way, my son went through a period of time where he wanted to be identified as they or them. And my colleague said to me, somebody I really respect and trust, he said, that's just too far. That's enough. I'm not going to do it. And it made for me a lot of sense. It felt like it was too far. But what I've had to kind of conceptualize for myself is that it's, again, this is between me and the parent, not between, I wouldn't say this to the child, but I had to deconstruct my ideas of sexual identity and orientation where I thought about it like they were telling me about their new favorite color. And that's not to minimize the fundamental nature of somebody's sexuality. And I don't want to minimize it by referring to it in a trivial way as just choosing a favorite color. But I had to think of it that way. For me to move through the phases of my child's awareness of themselves, I had to think about it in those terms. I had to deconstruct my ideas about what gender and orientation meant. The bottom line is that you meet them where they are at. I was attending a conference many years ago. In fact, my therapist, who's transgender, was the keynote speaker at this conference. And one of the therapists who worked in another wellness program raised his hand and said, I had a student who identified as transgender while they were with me. Then they went on to a therapeutic school afterwards and recanted their identity as transgender. So what's the deal with that, basically, is what he was saying. And my therapist said to this individual asking the question, he said, it sounds like you felt like you got duped. You were duped. And there was this long, uncomfortable pause. And she went on to explain, my therapist did, that you've got to take your ego out of it. You've got to take your ideas about getting it right or being fooled out of it. It's not, that's an ego thing. That's about you kind of knowing and needing not to be fooled, not to have the wool pulled over your eyes. And I think that speaks to a larger concept in parenting about letting go of getting it right, about being perfect. You don't know their truth. I talk about this idea that sometimes you can play a little game with yourself and pretend like you don't know somebody else's truth, that you don't know somebody else's idea. And if you do it long enough, you can actually start to believe it. When I teach this or talk about this, many parents say to me that they think I'm crazy, that it doesn't make sense. And because it's such a fundamental idea for them as a parent to know the truth as it relates to their child, that it doesn't make sense. It feels like an abdication of a primary role as a parent. But I can tell you, you can still have boundaries. You can still have your values. You can still have your limits, but you don't know your child's journey. And not knowing your child's journey doesn't rob you of the inherent right you have as a parent to set boundaries, as a person to set boundaries. But not knowing that truth is an important concept in this. And can you relate to them? I'm going to share. There's a great TED Talk. If you haven't seen it, I'll make some reference to it tonight. I refer to it in my new book. It's by a speaker named Ash Beckham, and it's about closets. It's about coming out of closets, and she talks about this idea that everybody has a closet. It might not be about gender or sexual orientation, but everybody has secrets, and how living in a closet is no place to be. And I'm not transgender and I'm not gay, but I can relate to how hard it is to be me and how lonely it is to be me and how I have felt that I needed to hide parts of my authentic self to get acceptance. And so I don't need to say to somebody that's transgender or gay or anywhere on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, I don't need to say that I know exactly how they feel, but I can relate and have empathy to the fundamental idea. I can show compassion and understanding. So if you can dig deep enough and see how you have similar fundamental struggles, you'll tend to show up more compassionately. And understanding that sexuality is a construct. When we talk about sex is typically referred to, often interchangeable with gender, but typically referred to as the primary sexual features or organs that somebody presents with. Now, the problem is that there's a lot of children that are born with male parts and female parts. And also, it's difficult to talk about organs because the brain is a sexual organ, right? There are male characteristics in a brain and female characteristics in a brain. So it's not completely clear, but sex is generally referred to, considered the primary sexual organs. Gender is a social idea that is how one sees oneself, how one identifies, right? And has a whole bunch of roles and pieces attached to it. Orientation, of course, is who you're attracted to. In all, there's so much about sexuality that is a social construct that's made up, and at different times and in different cultures, there are radically different ideas about sexuality, gender, and sexual orientation. Radically different ideas. And because we have such limited vision, we kind of see them in our culture. When we look at our culture, the dominant culture, I should say, we think that that's just the way that it is, and it's just simply not. It's not. It's not the truth. One of the questions to easily begin a discussion with somebody is ask them what their pronouns are. Many of the therapists and managers at Evoke have in their email signature what their pronouns are: he, his, she, her, they, them, or any other pronoun that they want to put. You can talk about that with people also. You can talk about your pronouns. A lot of our groups, when you do an introduction, we ask you to identify your pronouns. And it might seem obvious to you that you're presenting as female or male, but even by including your pronouns, you're really creating a feeling of inclusiveness with people that might not identify with the way that people perceive them, or that people might identify somewhere along the spectrum other than the binary of male and female. So talking about pronouns, asking people about pronouns. If you're curious about somebody's identity, their gender, you can ask them about their pronouns. What pronouns would you like me to use if you're unclear? That's the simplest way to talk to somebody about gender, because really it's in some ways, and my son made this clear, it's really none of your business beyond that. None of your business about, unless they want to tell you, it's none of your business. Get informed, but this is one of the key points. Don't necessarily make the person in your life the search engine for your information. In other words, find out from other sources. Go to Google. I have that on another slide. My son said, do not turn your child into Google. Some people want to be a source of information. It's the same thing that we've learned about race issues. Some people want to be active and talk about race and race issues. Some people are going to want to talk about gender and orientation, and some people don't want to become an activist. They don't want to be asked question after question. So you can ask them what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with, but you can take it upon yourself to go to support groups. I'll have some resources at the end to go to sources of information so that it's not on the child for you to become educated. Here are some of the mistakes. We love you anyway. Some of these I've made. We love you, we just don't approve of the behavior. I've heard that by many parents, especially from a religious context. It kind of is akin to love the sinner and hate the sin. The problem is that the sin is part of the way that the person sees their fundamental identity. So if you hate the sin, they experience it as hating them or rejecting them. So while that might not feel like rejection to you, it does to most everybody who identifies on the LGBTQ spectrum. I've heard people say, don't tell others in the family. Don't want to tell your younger siblings or extended family. I've heard parents share this as a way to kind of justify their own implicit biases, their own unconscious biases. So, and children can kind of sense that. Children sometimes want you to want to tell people, or at least to be okay to tell people. I'll talk a little bit later about getting permission about how to talk about it with other people. But for the most part, I've experienced children who have come out during the program, and that happens quite a bit. They want their parents to be okay telling everybody. I'm just worried that you'll have a harder life. Again, it might sound on the surface like it's not dismissive or judgmental or prejudiced, but that's how it gets interpreted. You wouldn't say that about things that line up with your value system. Like I said, you're still developing who you are is a very insidious way. The more that these mistakes get categorized under the umbrella of I care about you, this is why I'm saying this or doing this, the more harmful they can be. What about children? That's a question that, again, it might be a curiosity of yours. If you have a transgender son, for example, you might worry about the fact that they might, through hormone therapy or gender reassignment therapy, they might lose the ability to have their own children, to carry their own children. But that's not, that statement, that concern expressed to the child can easily be interpreted, is often interpreted as a sign of a lack of support. Outing them, I made this mistake early on in my career. When there was suspicion or even evidence that children were gay, that young men were gay, I would at least push If not, support a parent writing something in what we used to call the impact letter that would out the child. And I justified it by saying there's nothing to be ashamed of. I justified it again under the umbrella that I wasn't shaming them, that I wasn't judging them. And I've had to listen to more than one of my former students talk about the pain of being outed by me or implicitly by me by allowing the parents to write something in that first public letter. It is not your right to out somebody else. When they do come out to you, my son made this clear. Ask them about how they would like you to handle it with others. How would you like me to handle this with grandfather and grandmother? With your cousins, with my siblings, in the community, with strangers. Ask them how they would like you to handle it. Letting them know that you're willing to do it, how they would like it to happen. Like I said, pushing them out to others is another version of outing them. When you make mistakes about misgendering or about just ignorant statements that you might make, comments about I can't be perfect, right? Subtly expressing your shame through statements like that. Don't make it about yourself, about your losses, about your shame, about you getting it right or not. They don't want to have to take care of you. And again, so many of these principles lend themselves, or can be borrowed, I should say, from other areas in parenting and can be applied to this. Don't make them feel like a burden or ask them to take care of your guilt for making mistakes. Just simply apologize and correct yourself. And if they get upset with you, apologize again. Use proper pronouns when dealing with transgender folks. Use proper pronouns even when you're talking about a time before they came out, a time before. If they presented themselves as female early in their life, don't talk about those early activities or memories with she or her if they come out, for example, as male. Use the pronoun with which they identify today, even if you're talking about historical events or stories. And then, like I said, use Google. Don't turn them into your education system. Most importantly and practically, how you will receive them can make all the difference in their world. Will make all the difference in their world. Excuse me. So it's important. And even if you stumble, ultimately, how you accept and receive them will make a big difference. I borrowed some of this from the CDC, from the Center for Disease Control. What parents can do. Positive parenting practices such as having honest and open conversations can help reduce teen health risk behaviors. How parents engage with their LGBTQ plus teen can have tremendous impact on their adolescents' current and future mental and physical health. Supportive and accepting parents can help youth cope with the challenges of being an LGBTQ plus teen. On the other hand, unsupportive parents who react negatively to learning that their daughter or son is LGBTQ plus can make it harder for their teen to thrive. Parental rejection has been linked to depression, use of drugs and alcohol, and risky sexual behavior among teens. And I'm going to talk about some data. I've already talked about the data that I got from a local presentation last year, but I'll talk about some more data from the Center for Disease Control a little bit later. To be supportive, parents should talk openly and supportively with their teen about any problems or concerns. It's also important for parents to watch for behaviors that might indicate their teen is a victim of bullying or violence, or that their teen may be victimizing others. If bullying, violence, or depression is suspected, parents should take immediate action working with school personnel and other adults in the community. Each episode of LGBTQ plus victimization, such as physical or verbal harassment or abuse, greatly increases the likelihood of self-harming behavior. Some of that might just seem obvious to you, but how you receive, how you talk to them, how you support them practically, regardless of your value system, can have a dramatic impact practically on their mental health and mental state, including their survival. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 24. LGBTQ youth seriously contemplate suicide 3 times at the rate of heterosexual youth across the spectrum. They're almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. In Utah, the predominant religion is Mormonism, is Latter-day Saints. When they came out with a policy, 4 or 5 years ago, around homosexuality, and it wasn't even related to the children, it was related to parents of children, gay parents of children. The suicide rate in Utah in the LDS community increased by 400%. It came out in the Salt Lake Tribune. Of all the suicide attempts made by youth, LGBTQ plus youth suicide attempts were almost 5 times as likely to require medical treatment than those of heterosexual youth. So the attempts are more serious. Suicide attempts by LGBTQ youth and questioning youth are 4 to 6 times more likely to result in injury, poisoning, or overdose that requires treatment from a doctor or nurse compared to their straight peers. In a national study, 40% of transgender adults report having made a suicide attempt. 92% of these individuals reported having attempted suicide before the age of 25. LGBTQ plus youth who come from highly rejecting families are 8.4 times as likely to have attempted suicide as LGBTQ plus peers who reported no or low levels of family rejection. 8.5 times more likely. So regardless of your theoretical or religious construct, those are the facts. 1 out of 6. And I've had parents tell me that they're okay with that, by the way. I've had parents say that they would rather have their child not live than be gay. 1 out of 6 students nationwide, grades 9 to 12, seriously considered suicide in the past year. So you can kind of go backwards from this too. If your child is displaying symptoms, sometimes this can be one of the areas that can be explored with them gently under the supervision and direction of a therapist. It can also be it can be something that you can be curious about, that you can ask questions about, and also just monitoring your discussion and dialogue around LGBTQ youth or people in general. Children read what you talk about, what you feel, they hear it. Research suggests that LGBTQ plus teens experience a better health outcomes when their parents support their sexual orientation in positive and affirming ways compared to teens that don't, of course. They're more likely, if they experience rejection, to experience depression, attempted suicide, drugs and alcohol, or become infected with sexually transmitted diseases. You can go to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. You can go for lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender health. Go to cdc.gov/LGBThealth/youth. Or you can learn as a parent more parent information from cdc.gov/health/youth/adolescent health/monitoring. Advocates for Youth, go to advocatesforyouth.org. And the American Psychological Association provides some resources under apa.org/topics/sexuality/orientation. The Family Acceptance Project, go to familyproject.sfsu.edu. Gender Spectrum Education and Training, go to genderspectrum.org. And then you can also go to PFLAG, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. Go to pflag.org. I want to talk about this TED Talk from Ash Beckham. She gives some advice to those that are coming out of closet. And I took one of them because I thought it was a powerful perspective to hear. She says to the person, the LGBTQ individual, she says, be unapologetic. You are speaking your truth. Never apologize for that. And some folks might have gotten hurt along the way. So sure, apologize for what you've done, but never apologize for who you are. And yeah, some folks may be disappointed, but that's on them, not on you. Those are their expectations of who you are, not yours. That is their story, not yours. The only story that matters is the one that you want to write. So it gives you a perspective about what a healthy kind of sensibility is in supporting somebody who's LGBTQ. And again, speaking to this way of relating, she talks about hard is hard. She says, sure, I can give 100 reasons why coming out of my closet as a lesbian was harder than coming out of yours. But here's the thing, hard is not relative. Hard is hard. Who can tell me that explaining to somebody you've just declared bankruptcy is harder than telling someone you just cheated on them? Who can tell me that his coming out story is harder than telling your 5-year-old you're getting a divorce? There is no harder. There's just hard. We need to stop ranking our hard against everybody else's hard to make us feel better or worse about our closet and just commiserate on the fact that we all have hard. I thought this is a really powerful way to develop empathy for us. So what are the take-homes? Hard is hard. Show compassion and empathy toward them. Understand that our perspective at Evoke, we want to support parents and their value system, and our perspective is to provide the science that we know from psychology and mental health research. Learning to expand and grow yourself. I know for me, it's been an incredible learning process to support a child who came out first as bisexual, excuse me, then as gay, then as non-binary, then as transgender. Listening is always a good idea. Get support and resources, and remember, don't rely inordinately on the individual that you care about for that education. It's not okay to respond with, I think it is wrong. Excuse me. Or we love you even though you are gay. Things that we think might be harmless are not harmless. Anything less than celebrating their courage for finding and expressing their authentic self can be interpreted as hate or rejection. All right, I'm happy to take any comments or questions. Somebody writes, I am the mom of a 15-year-old trans son who has been grappling with gender identity for not quite 2 years. We have supported his social transition 100% and allowed and encouraged exploration and making all non-medical changes. Name, pronouns, clothing, hair, chest binding. Very supportive, accepting, progressing family, and supporting school community. Still, there has been dangerous behavior. Son has been fixated on starting hormones, calling us unsupportive for not allowing this. And since Evoke is just starting to let go of blaming us parents. What advice you have for us in thinking about allowing him to start irreversible medical changes when we know the brain is not fully formed at this age? And given previously unknown abusive relationship occurring during same timetable 2 years ago? That's a really, really good question. I empathize with you in it. I'll tell you a couple of things that I've heard. I talked to a doctor who has performed over 300 surgeries for gender reassignment. And she shared with me that not one person expressed regret for the gender reassignment surgery. But she said she had a couple of people who said that it didn't give them the feeling, the relief that they wanted, but that they didn't regret it. So that was illuminating for me. What I will tell you about mental health and mental illness and LGBTQ youth is it's important to understand the connection to gender orientation, gender identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and mental health issues, but also to find a separateness in them. Not every issue is going to be explained in reference to gender identity or sexual orientation. So that's really important. And so it's okay for you to take your time. It's okay for you to not be ready for allowing for irreversible medical steps. Just like everything that I talk about, it's a boundary you have. You just don't get to be right. That's my answer. You can say you're working on it. You're talking to a therapist, you're talking to doctors, you're educating yourself, and you're just not ready for that yet. And I would just encourage you not to be specific or justify your decision or lack of decision, I suppose you could call it. But just talk about you're a work in progress and you're trying to figure it out. And you want to be supportive and stay away from detailed justifications and explanations. That's what I would say. It's okay to have a boundary. It's okay to take your time. It's okay to educate yourself. It's okay to move slowly along for you and to hold a boundary as you go. You just don't get to be right about it. So don't justify or explain yourself to them. Someone says in a previous webinar about this topic, I love how you point out that gender is the only human characteristic that is binary, where there are only two choices. How do you reconcile the best and current thinking that gender identity is a continuum and can also have a fluidity in some people? And one of your opening ideas tonight, that kids know their identity when coming out, discouraging parents from expressing the idea gender may be still forming and changing. I didn't say that they know their gender. That wasn't my point. It's just that the response of saying you don't know yourself yet is a disguised way of not supporting them. So my answer would be, if I were coaching you, is say, okay, you identify as male, you identify as female. Years ago, I would have said, coming out as transgender is one of the most uncomfortable, terrifying things that can happen to somebody. And so they're not going to say it until they've exhausted every possible explanation for themselves. But I don't think that's true anymore. And experts that I've talked to don't think that that's true anymore today. The gender identity and sexual orientation is more of an open question to be explored for people. And so you just hold it lightly. That's what I would say. Is it's almost as if you have no opinion about it, which might feel very inauthentic or contrived for you, but you can talk about working toward that, right? You can talk about it. So I'm not saying that they have a perfect knowledge. I'm saying, I think for them, like with my son, it was a gradual process for him. And so it's more about holding them lightly. Respond to them as if they told you. And again, I wouldn't say this to them because I think it can be dismissive of the fundamental nature of somebody's gender identity or orientation. But if you can think about it as an analogy, think about them saying, well, my favorite color now is blue. It used to be red. Now it's blue. Now it's green. Now it's yellow. How much of a reaction would you have to that? That's what I mean by that. If your 16-year-old came out to you and said, my new favorite color is blue, you would not respond with, well, you never know. It might be green later or red later. You would just say, okay, because you're unattached to it. Somebody said, thanks for doing this webinar, Brad. I highly recommend attending PFLAG or other LGBTQ parent support groups. Having other parents that are farther on the journey was tremendously helpful for my husband and I. It was the right place to get compassion for where we were at when we joined the group. Absolutely. My wife has attended PFLAG here in Utah and has found it incredibly supportive. So please make use of the resources that you have. in your community. All right, I'm going to go to upcoming events and announcements, and then we'll take any live questions. Finding You, we have an in-person one scheduled for August. A Finding You 2 scheduled for August 6th through 8th is online. Just go to our website or email intensives@evoketherapy.com. There's too much information. If you're watching this live, you can see the dates up here. We're doing them online, and we're going to try some in person. We are doing special things to keep people safe, and there's testing. You have to come in a day earlier for testing, as do the staff. Upcoming parent support groups. Check our website. Check with your parent coordinator if you're a current parent. The next therapy support group for parents will be July 10th with Birgit at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Or if you are an intensive alumni, it'll be July 14th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. In fact, we should add PFLAG to this also. Ask all current parents to attend 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, or Family Anonymous. You can also try adultchildren.org or refugerecovery.org as a Buddhist-inspired non-emphasis on a higher power support group. NAMI.org is a great place to get resources in your local community. All of these broadcasts are available on the podcast app. Go on your favorite podcast app, search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer and search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us using the handle @EvokeTherapy, or you can find the Intensives program on Instagram using @EvokeTherapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. The Evoke Family Foundation is on Facebook. They're looking for new members and funds, but also new members. And then go to our Evoke Therapy blog. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon. I will be doing the Parents' Letter of Accountability. The Parents' Letter of Accountability next Monday, July 13th. So that'll be next week. If you're wondering about that, the purpose of that, if you're anxious about the idea of writing to your child, or even the idea of kind of writing an amends or an accountability letter to your child, I'd invite you to attend that. All right. Are there any more questions or comments? Looks like there are not. Somebody wrote this. One more. A dear friend is trying to be supportive of her 18-year-old child transitioning to male. She's upset, thinks her child is too young to make a permanent change. She is lying and saying she is supportive. I assume her child appreciates the support but feels the lie. Any suggestions? It's good trying. I mean, it's you can talk about your struggle as yours. Just go to PFLAG, go to the local Pride Center, go get support for you, go get educated. Go talk to other people who are farther along in the journey than you. So, but I commend your friend's attempt to try to say the right thing. But it's okay to just say, I'm struggling and I'm going to go get educated and I want to be supportive. I mean, that's still supportive. That would, it's like everything with parenting. You tell your child you're going to get support at a support group or a therapy session or somewhere else, you're reading books. That's all they can ask for. As I always say, if your children need you to be perfect, they're doomed. They really are. They just need you to make sure that you understand that it's your project, that your life is your project. That's what they need. You're a work in progress, and you know it. All right, folks, I'll talk to you next Monday, July 13th. Thanks for joining me tonight. I hope this is helpful. Have a great evening. Talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.